What's up guys, the Vanguard Power Air is a paddle you have all been asking me about ever since teaser images have come out. I've had this paddle to test out for a few months, so here are my thoughts on it. First, this paddle is the official release of the Selkirk Labs Project 002. So if you remember when that paddle launched, I talked about how the whole idea of Selkirk Labs was to take R&D feedback and then implement those changes into the official release at a cheaper price. Just keep that in mind because that's a theme throughout this video. For the specs, you're looking at a price of $249.99, and right here I have the classic Invictus shape, but they will also have this in the S2 and Epic shape. This means it's a 5.25 inch octagon handle, 4 1/4 inch grip size, and an elongated shape. Average weight is about 8 ounces. One of the changes you'll notice from the 002 is the hole is now larger and more rounded off than it used to be. Next, you'll notice that this paddle is actually edgeless. Selkirk will now have 3 paddles that are edgeless: the Vanguard Power Air, the SLK Omega Max, and the Project 003. I've mentioned this before, but I think eventually most companies are going to switch over to edgeless designs. While there are some trade-offs to ditching the edge guard, I think generally it's a positive thing for most people. Edge guards are one of the most failure-prone spots on a paddle, and by removing it, you no longer have to worry about it coming unglued and exposing the polymer inside the paddle. I will say though, especially with the Power Air, I would highly recommend electrical tape. If you scratch the white paint, it's black underneath, which makes the scratches much more obvious. These few big spots were from my first day with it before I added the tape, and they are pretty noticeable. Electrical tape has done a good job protecting the paddle since I've put it on though. I really haven't added any additional markings to the edge guard since adding electrical tape. The Power Air is using the same surface texture as the 002, which means that it gets quite incredible spin. In my testing, it reached 1851 RPM, which is just a little bit better than the 1800 that I achieved on the 002. I think the spin potential on these is probably the exact same. I've likely just improved a bit, or that is up to the small variance that I usually expect in my testing anyways. So the Power Air is still the king of spin, just like the 002 was. I've also had mine since May and used it quite a bit, and even after retesting, it was still over 1800 RPM. So the surface texture on this is holding up extremely well. My Yola Hyperion in just 2 months of play had dropped significantly in spin performance. So it's nice to see that Selkirk figured out something that makes these surface textures last for quite a while. So if you recall from my original 002 review, I said that the sweet spot was one of the smallest I had ever used in any paddle. It was easily my biggest complaint of the paddle, and Lab seems to have taken that feedback and noticeably improved it for the Power Air. It's hard to say exactly what caused this fix, but the two things that are most obvious from looking at the paddle are the lack of edge guard and the increased hole size. It's hard to say exactly how this would impact the sweet spot, but what I can say is that it is noticeably improved from the 002. I still don't think it's as nice of a sweet spot as something like the Yola Hyperion CFS, but I think if the sweet spot was the reason you didn't like the 002, then this will probably fix most of that issue for you. This paddle is absolutely still a power paddle, but I think the trade-off of enlarging the sweet spot has been that you do sacrifice a little bit of power from the 002. While the Air is still very powerful, I don't feel like it comes off as hot or as crisp feeling as the 002. With that being said, I still think this has a ton of power, but if you're using a 002 and specifically love how fast the ball is coming off, just be aware that it's not quite the same on the Air. In my opinion, they basically took the paddle and balanced it more. Before, you had a small sweet spot and ton of power, and the touch was really lacking. Now it feels like you have a larger sweet spot and gained more control at the expense of a little bit of power, which in my opinion makes the paddle much more playable for a lot of players out there. I think you're going to see a select group of people who are die-hard fans of the 002, but for the vast majority of players, the Power Air will be the better paddle. Despite the slight loss of power, I still think the Power Air is one of the most power-oriented paddles on the market. When the ball goes up around head height, you can seriously destroy the ball. There's a very noticeable change in put-away power for me when I'm using the Air compared to the 003 or Hyperion CFS or almost any other control-oriented paddle out there. Control is definitely the biggest struggle with this paddle. Initially, I had a very hard time dinking, blocking, and resetting. The paddle has so much pop that all my muscle memory was basically useless and put my balls up way too high. I honestly didn't think this paddle would be usable at all for doubles because of this, but after adding lead tape to the sides and the throat, the paddle became much easier for me to use. I now have the paddle weighted up to 9.1 ounces, and it feels a bit more soft and muted with the added lead tape, which is exactly how I like my paddles to feel. This made a noticeable improvement in my ability to use the paddle for doubles, and I felt like it made controlling all my shots much easier. So if you find you're in a similar situation with this paddle, I would definitely recommend some lead tape at the throat and sides. Just know that in general, you're going to have to soften your hands up a lot to use this paddle if you compare it to something like a Hyperion or Model E or basically any other raw carbon fiber surface paddle. Springy is probably the best way I would describe the Power Air. It feels like it sinks in and then launches off the face. It feels a tad bit more soft and plush in comparison to the 002, which felt very hard and crisp to me, but not nearly as soft and plush as most raw carbon fiber paddles on the market. This paddle definitely has a more polarizing feel compared to a lot of what is on the market. It's not personally my favorite feeling paddle out there, and I think for most people, it's going to be a love it or hate it type of deal. It's kind of like Gearbox, where there are people out there who absolutely love and adore how those paddles feel, but then you have a whole other group of people that can't stand how it feels. I think it's gonna be a fairly similar story with the Power Air. The only complaint for durability, which I've already mentioned, is how easy it is to scratch the edge guard. If the paddle was black, you really wouldn't notice it that much, but since it's white, those paint chips become very obvious if you scrape your paddle on the ground a lot. Definitely put some white electrical tape over this to keep it covered. Also, the face chipping seems to be much improved over the original 002. If you look very closely on the face of the paddle, there are some really small markings, but again, this paddle's been being used since May, and on the 002, it looked significantly more beat up in a shorter amount of time. So it's nice to see that they did something to address that chipping issue. The swing weight of the Power Air out of the box is the same as the 002, coming in at 112. In my research so far, this feels to be about the average swing weight of most paddles, especially elongated ones. Doesn't feel particularly easy to swing, but definitely not hard either. After adding my lead tape, it's now up to 120, which is definitely on the heavier side of swing weights for pickleball. Now that you guys have heard my opinion, here are my tester's thoughts.
What's up, guys? My name is Chris Olsen, and this is the studio.
That's gonna end up in a video.
Hey guys, how's it going? This week I got to use the Power Air. We've had it for a little while now, so I suppose I've gotten to use it a little longer than that. I put the lead tape here originally, and then Chris added the lead tape here. I actually did like it with both, but it was good with just the one. I felt like it did need the lead tape just to help push through the ball a little more and add some stability to the paddle. Compared to the 002, I definitely think this is a massive improvement. The sweet spot is much bigger, and despite there being a bigger hole in the paddle, it is zero problems regards to less paddle face. I've never hit the hole on this paddle. Sweet spot, like I said, was much bigger. I felt like it was a lot more forgiving. Even if you hit the sides, especially with the lead tape added, the ball didn't just immediately die. On the 002, I felt like it just immediately died. So that was nice. Power, definitely a lot less power. The 002 was a straight up bazooka. I mean, the ball was just flying. It's not quite as uncontrollable, which is really nice, especially in dinks and stuff. I feel like I have a lot more control just at the net with my volleys and my dinks. I feel like I can lean in and take them out of the air. Whereas with the 002, I felt like if I leaned in and took it out of the air, it might actually be popped up a little just because it had so much power coming out of it. Spin is definitely similar. I did feel like it was a little less with this paddle than the 002. That could be because I'm so used to using the 002 at this point that it just doesn't feel like a ton as it is. The ball is still, especially on my serve, arcs a lot compared to pretty much every other paddle. I've only used a few other paddles that are even comparable at this point to the 002 and the Power Air. So that's definitely a plus in my opinion. Yeah, so just to close my thoughts on it, I definitely think it is overall a big improvement. I think for singles, it's not necessarily an improvement, especially if you drive the ball a lot. I tend to drop and come in and dink rather than just drive. I like to play at the net in singles. In doubles, it's definitely a huge improvement. I think this is a huge win for Selkirk, especially if you look at the way that they're doing labs and the way that this came out compared to the 002. I think this is definitely going to be an easier paddle for people to play with. The 002 is definitely a huge adjustment to play with compared to every other paddle. And this is a bit of an adjustment, but I don't think it's a straight up like new learning curve. Like the 002 was just so different that I had to change a lot of my game just to adjust to it. Less dinking, a lot less dropping, and more driving. Whereas this, I feel like I can mix in both, but you definitely play faster with the Power Air. And so I'm curious to see what they do in the future with these paddles, but I think the Power Air will definitely be a go-to if you like to play a little faster, but you don't want to lose all that control. You still like to dink and drop.
So I was able to play with the Vanguard Power Air. I would say in comparison to the Project 002, it keeps a lot of the same aspects, but it expands upon the sweet spot. Sweet spot's a lot bigger. Project 002 probably has the smallest sweet spot on the market, and this substantially increases it. I wouldn't say it's as big as like a Hyperion CFS, but it is quite a bit bigger and more noticeable if you've played with the Project 002. I would also say you can see edgeless design. It makes for a little bit different feel. It feels less substantial in your hand. Not that it feels flimsy, but it just feels very light and maneuverable. So I would definitely recommend adding lead tape along the side and along the throat. I would also say overall the power is decreased a little bit in comparison to Project 002. It's not as crazy powerful, but it does keep the same amount of spin, I would say, and the maneuverability is still there and adds just a little bit extra control. I would say overall, enjoyed playing with it. It is something to get used to if you're coming from anything other than the Project 002, because I feel like there's a little bit smaller sweet spot in comparison to most paddles, but it does have incredible spin, really good power, and pretty decent control for a Project 002 upgrade. I would say in comparison to my current paddle, the Yola, I would say that this paddle I feel like it has a little bit more spin. As Chris has pointed out, my dinks are a lot more aggressive. There's a lot more, especially when I had a backhand topspin dink, it's a lot harder to catch up to it. I would say though, it doesn't feel as solid just because it is lighter than the Yola, and I really like that really solid kind of plush feel, especially on my dinks. I feel like I have a lot of control on my dinks and thirds when I have that feel. And since this is a little bit lighter and it has a little bit more of a whippy feeling, that makes it more difficult for me to hit my dinks and my drops. I would say if you really enjoy the 002, and you're looking for a little bit more control, this is for sure a good paddle to switch to. And if you didn't like the Project 002 because the sweet spot was a little bit too small for you or it didn't have enough control, also great option. I prefer this over every other model outside of the Project 002. I still like the increased pace of that, but I think for most people this is a better option.
All in all, the Power Air is a definitive upgrade over the 002 in almost every single way. Every complaint I had has essentially been fixed, which actually does surprise me. I really didn't think that the 002 was going to change much from its labs version to launch because enough people seem to really enjoy it, but I'm pleasantly surprised that they managed to improve both the sweet spot and balance power better for the majority of people while also removing the edge guard and making the face less prone to chipping. In my opinion, the Power Air is strictly a better version of the 002. Like I said, some people are still going to be huge fans of the 002, but for the other 99% of players out there, this is a better paddle. The area I see this paddle excelling in the most is singles. So much of singles is drives, power, and having heavy spin to keep your ball in play for passing shots. And the Power Air does all of those really well. Right now, I am torn between using the 003 and Power Air for singles. I mentioned that the 003 isn't a great singles paddle for most people, but for whatever reason, I have enjoyed playing singles with it. There's just something about how the ball comes off the face that feels really nice. The overall feel of the 003 is better than the Power Air in my opinion, so maybe that's part of it. I just like how the 003 has less vibrations and doesn't feel as polarizing to me. but objectively, I think the Power Air is a better singles paddle. Also, I think how the Power Air turned out gives us a much better indicator of how the labs program is actually working. I was extremely skeptical of how much feedback would be taken and implemented into official releases, and after seeing the official release from labs turn out this well, I'm much more optimistic about how the program works as a whole. They're currently reworking the 001 and giving the founding members of labs a free version of it, so I'll be curious to know if they make noticeable improvements to that as well, like they were able to for the Power Air. I also think this goes to show that if you're patient and not in a rush to try the latest and greatest paddles, then you might as well wait. The 002 was $333. Now the Power Air is basically a better version of it in almost every way, and it's $250. So some of that patience gets rewarded if you're fine waiting. So who is this paddle for? I think it's for singles players as well as those who really like to play a big power game in doubles. I also think this is one of the better paddles out there for tennis players. I've had a number of tennis players use the 002 and the Air, and they always end up saying it's the closest feeling thing to an actual tennis racket. A lot of that is probably due to the heavy amounts of spin you can generate as well as the power coming off the paddle. If you're newer to the game, or even an intermediate player, I would probably recommend holding off on the Air. At $250, I think it's a really steep price, and a lot of what makes this paddle great probably won't benefit you. If you don't have good ground stroke mechanics or roll volleys, the added spin potential can't really help you. When people are newer, their preferences also tend to change fairly quickly over a few months of playing, and investing in a $250 paddle while you're still developing your style is a lot of money. I also think for intermediate players that $250 is a lot of money when there are definitely paddles that will perform adequately at your level. I think the Power Air is really for those who want to be much more competitive and take the sport more serious and are probably 4.0 and above. It's not that you can't use the paddle if you're an intermediate player, you totally can. I just think the value you get at $250 is a lot less than other paddles on the market. For the beginners, instead of the Power Air, I would recommend you check out the SLK Omega Max if your budget is up to $140. It has a lot of similar characteristics as the Power Air, but it's $110 cheaper. I'll have a full review out on that shortly. So there you guys go. Those are my thoughts on the Vanguard Power Air. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.